ever feel like you're just bombarded with information constantly?
Yeah.
And trying to make a good choice out of all of it?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're talking about today.
Exactly.
We're diving deep into Think Sharp, Developing Critical Thinking Habits by Tyler Andrew Cole.
Yes.
And this book is really about escaping that overwhelmed feeling and unlocking some serious brain power.
It is. And what I find interesting about this is this comes from the podcast world.
Oh, really?
Grow to the Top, that's Cole's channel.
Okay.
And so it's written to be like immediately useful.
I like it.
Very practical.
Yeah, this isn't just some theory.
Right.
This is like
actionable.
Here's how to actually use this stuff.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's great.
Before we go on with the podcast, I invite you to download the free bundle, which contains the ebook and an executive summary of all the chapters with the key takeaways. Click on the first link in the description to claim your free bundle now and maximize your learning potential. Now it's free, but it won't be for long, so make sure to grab it while you can.
And, I tore through this thing.
Yeah.
And chapter 1 had me hooked because instead of just jumping into like, all right, here's the techniques you use.
Right.
He starts with mindset.
And that's so important because so many people think of intelligence as something that's fixed.
Completely.
Like you either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And this book is really in line with Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset.
Right.
Saying that it's a skill that you can develop.
Yes.
And I think that's a really powerful aha right up front for people to realize that.
Absolutely. And he has this whole thing about, how we say like, oh, I'm terrible at this. It's like, just add one word.
Right.
Instead of saying I'm terrible at this, say I'm not good at this.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's amazing how just like
it changes everything.
Such a small shift.
Yeah.
Could be so powerful.
Well, and it changes how you approach challenges too. Like when you hit a setback, it's not proof that, oh, see, I'm not smart enough.
Right.
It's like, okay, this is how I learn and get smarter.
It's part of the process.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
So it's like those mental blocks we put up become stepping stones instead.
I love that, yeah.
So then we move on to chapter 2.
Okay.
And this is where things get really practical and it's all about observation.
Okay.
Which sounds so basic.
It does.
But Cole really makes you think about how much we just don't notice.
We don't.
Like how many times have you gotten home from work and someone's like, how was traffic? And you're like, no, I have no idea.
I don't even remember.
Yeah.
That's scary.
So for example, think about your commute.
Okay.
Every day.
Yeah.
To work or wherever you go. How many details do you actually register?
Right. And that's so important because our brains are filtering out so much information all the time.
Yes.
I mean, think about it. Two people can look at the same thing and have totally different experiences, and it's all based on what they're paying attention to.
It's so true. And it's like that experiment where they had people watching a basketball game.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
And they had to count the passes.
Yeah.
And they completely missed the gorilla walking through.
It's amazing how our brains work.
I know.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, it is.
Before we continue, I want to remind you that you can always find the free audiobook version of this book on the main Grow to the Top channel. Click on the second link in the description to start listening now.
So the book talks about things like active listening.
Okay.
Not just waiting for your turn to talk, but really absorbing what's being said.
Interesting.
And then there's visual scanning.
Visual scanning.
Which I love this idea.
Yep.
It's like almost like an artist would do it.
Okay.
It's actively seeking information. Not just glancing around.
So there's a difference between looking and seeing?
Yes.
I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
Big time.
And it's not just what you observe, but the connections you make.
Oh, for sure. Like the book gives an example about like, you notice a coworker's desk is usually really tidy.
Yeah.
But today it's a mess and they keep looking at their watch and talking really fast.
Yeah.
And individually those things might not mean much.
Right.
But when you put them all together.
You're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, this person is stressed and they're probably late for something.
They're running behind.
Yeah.
Exactly. It all comes together.
It does.
Okay, so chapter 3, get ready, because this is where things get good.
Okay.
This is all about the power of asking why.
Which again seems so simple.
Right.
But I think we're in a world now where we have so much information coming at us that asking why is almost like a superpower.
It cuts through all the noise.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
Because it's like instead of taking things at face value, you're giving yourself permission to dig a little deeper.
And to question things too.
Right.
Because, the thing is, we've got away from questioning things.
Totally.
And questioning is how we learn.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to ask why.
This chapter is like giving yourself permission to channel your inner Socrates.
There you go.
Right.
I love that.
Like really get in there and understand.
And that's something that goes way back, you know, like Socrates.
Yeah.
That's what the Socratic method is all about.
Totally.
Asking why.
And the book gives some really great examples of how to phrase those why questions.
Oh, does it? Okay.
So instead of saying like, is this a good idea?
Right.
It's what criteria should we use to figure that out?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I do.
Or instead of saying I disagree,
Right.
it's can you help me understand why you see it that way?
Okay.
So it's like still asking why,
Yeah.
but in a way that's a little bit more.
Yeah, it opens a dialogue
Yes,
instead of shutting it down.
exactly.
Right.
And I will say,
Yeah.
I love asking why,
Okay.
but I also don't want to be that person.
Right.
It's just constantly like,
Questioning everything
why?
to the point where it's annoying.
Yes.
Right.
How do you find that balance?
That's a good question. It's definitely a balance, right? Like you don't want to question everything, but you also don't want to just accept everything at face value.
Right.
There are times when you really do need to dig deeper. And I think the book talks about this technique called the 5 whys,
Yes.
which is essentially asking why 5 times to try to get to the root cause of something.
And that can be so powerful.
It is.
Because I feel like, especially when you're dealing with like a tricky problem or, you know, you're trying to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to peel back those layers.
Exactly. And, you know, oftentimes the first why is obvious.
Right.
But then when you get to like why number 4 or 5, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that was a factor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like those things you would have never connected otherwise.
Yeah. It's exactly.
Okay. So chapter 4 is about pattern analysis. And our brains are naturally wired to spot patterns, right?
Right. We're pattern-seeking creatures.
Yes. But this is about doing it consciously and usefully.
Yes. Because patterns can be really helpful in terms of making sense of the world.
Completely. Like once you start seeing those patterns, then you can use them to predict what might happen next.
Right. Or to make better decisions.
Yes.
Because you have a better understanding of what's likely to happen.
It's like you're not just reacting to things anymore. You're like anticipating.
Exactly. And Cole talks about different ways to do this,
Okay.
like using visuals
Okay.
to help you spot patterns.
Yeah.
So like if you're looking at a bunch of data, maybe create a chart or a graph because that can help you see things that you wouldn't necessarily see just by looking at the raw numbers.
Totally. And I even think about it in terms of like conversations you have with people or, you know, situations that you find yourself in.
Right.
If you start noticing those patterns, it's like, okay, what's really going on here?
Exactly. And that can be really insightful.
It can.
Yeah,
Okay, now there's a little bit of a trap here, right?
there is.
Because just because two things happen together doesn't mean one causes the other.
Exactly. That's the classic correlation versus causation problem.
Yes.
And the book gives this great example. It's like saying that, you know, ice cream sales go up in the summer and crime rates also go up in the summer.
Right.
So therefore, ice cream must cause crime.
That's hilarious.
Right. But it's a silly example, but it makes the point.
It does make the point.
You can't just assume that because two things are happening at the same time that one is causing the other.
Right. You have to dig deeper. You have to look for the real connections.
Exactly.
So chapter 5, this one I think is really interesting. It's about challenging our biases.
Yes. And we all have them.
Oh, we do.
Right. We all have these little biases that creep into our thinking.
Our brains are amazing.
They are.
But they also play these tricks on us.
They do.
Why do they do that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of how our brains have evolved to make sense of the world, right? Like we've developed these mental shortcuts
Right.
to help us make decisions quickly.
Okay.
But sometimes those shortcuts can lead us astray.
Okay, so what are some examples of these biases that we should be aware of?
Well, one of the big ones is confirmation bias,
Okay.
which is our tendency to favor information that confirms what we already believe.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that one.
Oh, yeah, we all are.
It's so easy to just like gravitate toward the things that already align with your existing worldview.
It is. And you know, it's not even necessarily conscious.
Yeah.
It's just that our brains are kind of wired to seek out that information that confirms what we already believe.
That makes me feel a little bit better.
Well, there you go.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's not just me being stubborn.
No, it's human nature.
What other biases?
Well, there's the availability heuristic, which basically means that we tend to judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can recall similar examples.
Okay.
So, for example,
Yeah.
if you watch the news
Yep.
and you see a lot of stories about shark attacks.
Right.
You might start to think that shark attacks are much more common than they actually are.
Right, because you're seeing it everywhere. You're like, oh my gosh, there's sharks in the water.
Exactly, even though statistically you're much more likely to be struck by lightning or something like that.
Right.
But because those shark attack stories are so vivid and memorable,
Yes.
they stick with us.
Okay, I need to be more aware of this.
We all do.
For sure.
Yeah, it's just about being mindful of those biases and trying to catch ourselves when we're falling into those traps.
So how do we do that? What are some things we can do to kind of combat those biases?
Well, one of the best things you can do is just to actively seek out diverse viewpoints,
Okay.
even ones that make you uncomfortable.
Ooh, that's hard.
It is, but it's so important because if you're only ever exposed to information that confirms what you already believe,
Right.
then you're never really going to grow.
You're stuck in that echo chamber.
Exactly.
So it's like consciously seeking out those different perspectives.
And the book also talks about using structured decision-making tools.
Okay.
So instead of just going with your gut,
Yeah.
take the time to actually weigh your options, consider the pros and cons.
It's forcing yourself to slow down a little bit
that-
and not just react.
Because our gut can be influenced by our biases.
It can be.
So having those structured tools can help us to be a little bit more objective.
Love it. Okay. Chapter 6 is all about expanding your options. And I have to admit, this one was a little bit of a game changer for me
Really? How so?
because I don't know if you do this too, but
Yeah.
I tend to get stuck on like the first solution I come up with.
Oh, yeah, we all do.
It's like, okay, problem solved, moving on.
Exactly. And then we miss out on all those other possibilities.
Exactly. And this chapter is all about like not just settling for the first decent idea, but pushing yourself to come up with even better ones.
It's like thinking outside the box.
Yes. And Cole talks about it in terms of like convergent versus divergent thinking.
Oh, interesting.
So convergent thinking is when you're trying to narrow down to one right answer.
Okay.
But divergent thinking is about generating a bunch of possibilities
I like that.
before you decide. And that's where I think a lot of the magic happens.
It is because you're opening yourself up to possibilities that you might not have even considered otherwise.
Totally. And he talks about brainstorming, but doing it strategically.
Okay.
So it's not just like a free-for-all where everyone's just shouting out ideas.
Right.
It's like creating a space where there are no bad ideas,
Okay.
where you can really let loose and see what emerges.
I like that because sometimes those bad ideas can spark good ideas.
Exactly.
It's true.
And then there's this whole concept of lateral thinking, which honestly sounds a little intimidating,
What is that?
but it's really not. It's just about shifting your perspective.
Okay.
So the book gives this great example. It's like, instead of asking, how do we solve this problem? You ask, what if we had to solve this problem with no budget?
Oh, interesting.
What would we do?
That is interesting.
Right.
Because it forces you to think differently
Totally.
about the problem.
It's like you're so used to operating within certain constraints
Right.
that you don't even realize those constraints are there.
That's a good point.
And sometimes those constraints can actually lead to the most innovative solutions.
They can because they force you to be more creative,
Exactly.
to think outside the box.
I love that. Okay, chapter 7 really resonated with me.
Okay.
It's called Reflect Deeply, and it's about taking the time to actually learn from our experiences.
Which I think is something that a lot of us don't do enough of.
We don't.
We just go through life and we have all these experiences, but we don't really take the time to reflect on them and extract the lessons.
It's like we're on autopilot,
Exactly.
just going through the motions, and then we wonder why we keep making the same mistakes over and over again.
Exactly. And you know, it's like that saying, you can't learn to swim by reading a book.
Right.
Like you have to actually get in the water.
You got to jump in the pool.
You do, but it's not enough to just get in the pool. You have to actually think about what you're doing.
Or to be intentional about it.
Exactly.
You can't just be splashing around.
Right. You have to pay attention to your body, how you're moving through the water.
Okay, so how do we become more reflective? I feel like journaling is a big one.
Journaling is huge.
Have you been journaling about this book?
I have actually.
Here
It's
it is.
been really helpful just to jot down the insights that have really resonated with me. What about you?
Yeah, and sometimes it's even just like going back and rereading what you wrote a week ago or a month ago and seeing how your thinking has evolved.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, chapter 8. Decide confidently. This is one I desperately needed
Really?
because I am a champion overthinker.
Oh, yeah, I can relate to that.
It's a problem.
But you know what I think this chapter really highlights is that confidence comes from practice
Okay.
and that even our wrong decisions can be valuable if we're willing to learn from them.
So it's like trusting the process,
It is
even when you're not 100% certain of the outcome.
exactly because we're never going to be 100% certain of the outcome.
Right.
And if we wait until we are, we're never going to do anything.
We're going to be paralyzed.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like trusting yourself, trusting that you've done the work.
And that you'll figure it out as you go.
Yes, love it. Okay, and speaking of process, the book talks about some good ones like decision matrices.
Decision matrices.
Have you ever used one of those?
I have. They can be really helpful.
They can be.
Especially when you're trying to make a decision between like 2 or more really good options.
Yes.
Because it allows you to really break down the criteria that are important to you.
Okay.
And to compare the options side by side.
So you're not just like going with your gut or going with like the most emotionally appealing option.
Yeah. Exactly. It's bringing a little bit more structure to the decision-making process.
Love it. And sometimes you can't beat a good old-fashioned pros and cons list.
Sometimes that's all you need
Right.
to get clarity.
Okay, last chapter, chapter 9, live critically.
This is a big one.
It is, and it's not about being negative.
No,
That's
not at all. It's about integrating critical thinking into every aspect of your life.
So it's like living your life through the lens of a critical thinker.
Exactly. And imagine like a sharper, more aware version of yourself navigating the world.
Ooh, I like that.
That's living critically.
So it's like the best, most upgraded version of yourself.
Right. And it impacts every area of your life.
How so?
Well, it can help you to have stronger relationships because
Yeah.
you're more aware of your own biases and you're better able to communicate effectively.
Okay.
It can help you to make better decisions at work
Right.
because you're able to think through problems more critically.
You're not just reacting.
Exactly.
You're thinking about it.
And it can even make you a more effective leader.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, because you're able to see the big picture, you're able to think strategically, and you're able to make decisions that are in the best interest of everyone involved.
It's like you're tapping into that higher level of thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just about you, it's about everyone.
And the great thing is that it gets easier with practice.
It does.
Like any skill, the more you use it, the better you get at it.
So it becomes more automatic.
Exactly.
At that.
Yeah. It's like learning a new language at first. It's really difficult and you have to think about every word. But eventually you become fluent and you can just speak without even thinking about it.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of, I was going to say, Cole actually has another book that dives into using these skills in high pressure situations.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's called Stay Calm, Think Smart.
I'm going to have to check that out.
Me too. Yeah, I think it's a great companion to this one.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here into Think Sharp,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this. What's one decision, big or small, that you're facing right now?
Okay.
And how could you use even one of the techniques that we talked about today from this book to approach it a little bit differently?
I love that.
It's a challenge,
It is.
but I think it's a good one
I do too.
because we all have those decisions we're trying to make.
We do.
And this is a chance to put these skills into practice.
Exactly. And to see what happens.
See where a little sharpness can take you.